News tonight in the Nancy Guthrie case, Savannah Guthrie's mother, involving that video from her front door. Sources are now telling ABC News the masked suspect seen at the door was at the home before.
He was there before the night he took her. That is not a theory. That is not speculation. That is confirmed on camera by the same doorbell system investigators have been analyzing since day one. Days before Nancy Guthrie disappeared from her Tucson home, before the backpack, before the balaclava, before the gloves, the same man walked up to her front door, empty-handed, no bag, no weapon visible. He stood at the entrance of an 84-year-old woman's home in the middle of the night, and he looked around. He was not there to take her that night. He was there to learn her. He studied the camera. He tried to knock it off its bracket. When it would not come loose, he reached for the potted plant sitting on her doorstep and covered the lens with its own foliage. Then he left and came back. That single detail, a man standing at Nancy Guthrie's door days before she vanished, calm enough to improvise, disciplined enough to leave, changes the entire framework of this case. This was not random. This was not opportunistic. Someone identified Nancy Guthrie, researched her address, visited her home, and returned with a plan. 24 days later, she has still not been found. Tonight is day 24, and what we know tonight from law enforcement sources, from the most qualified forensic DNA expert in the country, and from a sheriff whose public statements directly contradict what he told NBC on camera, is more than what has been reported anywhere else. There is blood inside Nancy's home, in the same pattern as outside, vertical, undisturbed, no signs of struggle. A second independent law enforcement source confirmed it, and no official has said a word about it publicly. There is a mixed DNA sample sitting in a laboratory in Deerfield Beach, Florida, and the lead scientist on this case just told a national television network that separating it is a struggle. The same day, his office released a written statement saying there are no updates, and there are names. Upwards of 40 of them being investigated by the FBI on the same day. The sheriff told the public his team was not looking at any names at all. This is the Nancy Guthrie case, day 24, and nothing about it is what it appears to be. Before we get into every detail of what we know tonight, this case involves the abduction of an elderly woman. Some of what we cover in this episode is deeply disturbing. There are no graphic descriptions here, but if you are sensitive to content involving missing persons and violent crime, please take care of yourself first. Quick housekeeping before we get into it. If you are new here, hit subscribe right now and turn on notifications. This case is still active. Every time something breaks, you will get it here before it hits mainstream news. If you are already part of this community, thank you. Genuinely. Drop a comment right now and tell me where in the world you are watching from tonight. We have people following this case from across the globe, and I want to know where you are. Link to the community post is pinned. That is where all case updates go between episodes. Okay, let us get into it. It is day 24. In missing persons investigations, law enforcement talks about the first 72 hours as the critical window, the period when evidence is freshest, trails are warmest, and the odds of a safe recovery are highest. We are now 8 times beyond that window. Nancy Guthrie has been missing for 3 weeks and 3 days. And tonight, the investigation surrounding her disappearance is facing a transition that most people watching this have not heard about yet. But before we get to that, before we get to the DNA crisis, the contradictions coming from the sheriff's office, and what a former FBI insider told the New York Post about the way this investigation is being run, you need to understand who Nancy Guthrie actually is, not who she is to television, not who she is to the headlines, who she actually is. Because that matters. It matters for this story. And it matters for why, 24 days in, there are still hundreds of people working around the clock to find her. Nancy Ellen Long was born on January 27, 1942, in Fort Wright, Kentucky. She grew up in Cincinnati, and by the time she was finishing her studies at the University of Kentucky, but she was already doing what her youngest daughter would one day make her entire career. She was working in journalism, not as a reporter, as a society editor for the university's student newspaper, the Kentucky Colonel, covering campus life and Greek organizations with the same sharp attention to community that would define everything she did for the next 8 decades. She married Charles Guthrie, a mining engineer whose work took the family across continents. In the early 1970s, they settled in Tucson, Arizona, a city Nancy would spend the rest of her life in. She had 3 children. Savannah, born in Melbourne, Australia, while the family was living there for Charles's work. Annie, a poet and jeweler. And Cameron, who would go on to become a retired United States military colonel and F-16 pilot. In 1988, Charles Guthrie died. He was 49 years old. He had a heart attack on a mining trip in Mexico. And Nancy Guthrie, who had never held a professional job in her life, was suddenly the sole provider for 3 children in a city she had built her life in, but where she had no income and no professional safety net. What she did next defines everything you need to know about her. She did not move back to Kentucky. She did not rely on family. She got a job. Specifically, and this detail matters, she sought out a position at the University of Arizona Medical Center, where the benefit package included one thing that mattered more to her than the salary. Her children could attend the University of Arizona tuition-free. Savannah graduated from that institution in 1993, cum laude, with a degree in journalism. The career that took Savannah Guthrie to the anchor desk of NBC's Today show, one of the most watched morning programs in America, began with her mother's deliberate, sacrificial choice to work at a specific university so her daughter could study for free. Nancy spent 17 years at the University of Arizona. She started as a spokesperson for the University Medical Center. She was eventually promoted to associate to the vice president of university advancement. And along the way she built things. She created the Center Stage program, a monthly initiative that brought live musicians into the hospital environment to perform for patients, staff, and visitors. She ran MedCamp, a program specifically designed to introduce Arizona high school students to the medical field and open doors they might not have known existed. She also worked at the Daily Territorial, a Tucson business newspaper. She retired from the University of Arizona in 2007, but she did not slow down. Nancy Guthrie led Bible study classes. She played mahjong with friends. She belonged to a book club. She attended her Sunday church live stream every single week, a commitment so consistent that when she missed it on the morning of February 1st, 2026, the people who attended with her knew immediately that something was wrong. Her friend Marianne Blevins described her to Page 6 as a beautiful person who never mentioned being afraid of anyone. Her former colleague at the University of Arizona, retired Vice Provost Elizabeth Irvin, said Nancy made work upbeat and fun and called her a good leader. And Savannah Guthrie, on the occasion of her mother's 80th birthday, described her in front of a national television audience as someone who has met unthinkable challenges in her life with grit, without self-pity, with determination, and always with unshakable faith. That is who Nancy Guthrie is. Not a headline, not a missing person alert, a woman who built things, who sacrificed for her children, who played mahjong and read books and sang in church and ran programs for sick people in hospitals, because that is who she was. And on the evening of Saturday, January 31st, 2026, she had dinner with her family, came home, and went to bed. It was the last time anyone who loves her has seen her. Before we get to the night Nancy disappeared, there is something we need to address, that most coverage of this case has moved past too quickly. Because the night of February 1st was not the first time the suspect came to her home, it was the second. The Catalina Foothills neighborhood in Tucson, where Nancy lived, operates under local light pollution ordinances. What that means in practice is that there are no streetlights. At 2 in the morning in that neighborhood in February, it is not just dark. It is the kind of dark where someone can stand on your front doorstep and be completely invisible to a neighbor across the street. The kind of dark where you could study a house, map its exits, time its routines, and leave without a trace. The suspect knew this neighborhood. He came there before the night of the crime, and he came without a backpack, without a balaclava, and without any visible weapon. He arrived at Nancy's front door, stood there, and looked at the doorbell camera. He tried to knock it off its bracket. He tapped at it. It did not come free. And so without panic, without hurrying, with the kind of composure that tells you everything you need to know about the state of mind of the person you are dealing with, he reached down to the potted plant sitting on Nancy's doorstep, pulled some foliage from it, and used it to cover the camera lens. Then he walked away. You do not show up empty-handed to commit a crime. You show up empty-handed to plan one. That pre-visit, that reconnaissance trip, is one of the most significant details in the entire case because it tells us this was a 2-stage operation. Stage 1, learn the target, study her home, identify the camera, Test its stability. Understand the exits. Stage 2. Return prepared. For investigators, the pre-visit is simultaneously a gift and a complication. It is a gift because it means the suspect appears on camera, not once but at least twice, 2 separate appearances, 2 separate opportunities for image analysis, gait analysis, clothing identification. Forensic analysts have applied gait analysis to the available footage, studying the way this person bends, moves, and carries their weight. That analysis is ongoing. The complication is the question the pre-visit raises and has not answered. If this man came to Nancy Guthrie's home before the night of the abduction, how did he find her? Did he know her? Was he watching the street? Had he identified her specifically, or was she one of several potential targets he was studying? Those questions have not been answered publicly, and depending on the answer, the entire profile of this suspect changes. What we do know is this. Investigators believe the suspect may have been wearing a ring during the pre-visit, based on photographic analysis of the footage. That detail is actively being investigated. And despite extensive review of surveillance footage across the surrounding area, investigators have so far been unable to associate a specific vehicle with either visit. No car, no direction of approach, no confirmed route in or out. Whatever brought him to that door the first time, he memorized what he needed, and he came back. Saturday, January 31st, 2026. The last full day of Nancy Guthrie's known life as a free woman begins, as far as we can document it, at 5:32 inches the afternoon. Nancy takes an Uber from her home to her daughter Annie's house for a family dinner. That Uber driver has since been interviewed by investigators. It is a detail most outlets have skipped past, but it matters, because it means there is at least one additional witness who saw Nancy Guthrie alive and in good spirits on the evening before her disappearance. Whatever conversation happened in that car, whatever Nancy said or did not say, whatever the driver observed, investigators have it. The dinner is with family, the evening is ordinary, and at 9:48 inches the evening, Annie's husband, Tommaso Cioni, drives Nancy home. At 9:48, the garage door at Nancy's home opens. At 9:50, it closes. Tommaso Cioni waits in the driveway for approximately 2 minutes, watching to make sure she is safely inside, and then he drives away. In those 2 minutes, Nancy walked from her garage into her house, set down her things, and began whatever she did to wind down before bed. She was home. She was safe. She had no idea. What happened in the next 4 hours? We do not know. The doorbell camera was still working. Whatever the camera captured between 9:50 inches the evening and 1:47 inches the morning has not been made public and may no longer be fully recoverable. The camera system, like many home security systems, continuously overwrites its own recordings. By the time investigators arrived and began working to retrieve the footage, the live recording from those hours was already gone. At 1:47 inches the morning on Sunday, February 1st, the doorbell camera went offline. That timestamp is not just a time, it is a window into the suspect's movements. At 1:47 a.m., he was already at the property, or close enough to it to reach the camera. The house was dark. Nancy had been home for nearly 4 hours. She had almost certainly been asleep for most of them, and the first thing the suspect did, when he came back, was disable the camera. 41 minutes later at 2:28 inches the morning, Nancy Guthrie's pacemaker disconnected from her phone. Take a moment to understand what 41 minutes means in this context. 41 minutes is enough time to enter a house, to move through it in the dark, to find a sleeping person, to do whatever was done, and to leave. The pacemaker disconnecting does not by itself confirm harm. It simply means the Bluetooth connection between the device and her phone was severed. That happens when the phone and the device are separated beyond Bluetooth range. Nancy moved away from her phone, or her phone moved away from her. That is the last electronic trace of Nancy Guthrie that exists. When deputies arrived hours later, responding initially to what they believed was a call about a missing elderly woman, they were not prepared for what they found. The back door of the home was wide open, not forced, simply open, a planned exit. The front doorbell camera, what a first law enforcement source described as cameras, plural, Nest cameras, had been knocked off or ripped from their mounts. A second independent source described it as definitely moved, ripped, or gone in some way. Not smashed, but gone, displaced, rendered useless. Inside the home, Nancy's phone, her glasses, her shoes, her medication, everything a person would take if they were leaving of their own accord, none of it was gone. And there was something else inside the home, something that was not confirmed publicly on day 1 or day 5 or day 10. Something a first law enforcement source reported on day 3 of the investigation and a second independent source confirmed on day 21. There was blood. Let us be precise about what we know and what we do not know about the blood evidence, because the distinction matters enormously. What the public has seen is the footage from outside Nancy's home. Blood droplets confirmed by the sheriff's department as Nancy's own DNA leading away from her front door and down the gravel path toward the driveway. The pattern of those droplets has been described by multiple forensic experts as vertical, straight down, 90 degrees, no smearing, no stepping, no signs of a physical confrontation or struggle at that front doorstep. Forensic scientists have a specific term for this type of pattern. It is called a passive blood stain. Blood that falls purely under gravity from a wound on a body that is moving, but not fighting. That pattern does not mean Nancy was not hurt. It means that at the moment she was bleeding and moving along that path, she was not struggling. Whether that absence of struggle means she was unconscious, incapacitated, sedated, or simply had no opportunity, we do not know. What a law enforcement source first reported on day 3 of this investigation and what a second independent law enforcement source confirmed on day 21 is that the same pattern exists inside the home. The vertical drip pattern, the same formation, no smearing, no signs of struggle. The blood found inside the house matches the blood found outside in its characteristics. This is significant for 2 reasons. First, it means the bleeding began inside the house, not at the front door. Whatever happened to Nancy Guthrie happened inside her home before she was moved out of it. Second, the undisturbed pattern inside suggests the same thing. The undisturbed pattern outside suggests she was not fighting at that moment. She was moving or being moved while bleeding, in a controlled and deliberate way. The source who confirmed this on day 21 could not or would not say where inside the house the blood was located. That question was asked directly and went unanswered. Not in the bedroom. Not in the hallway, not in the entrance. That single unknown piece of geography changes the story of exactly how this abduction unfolded. If the blood is near the back door, Nancy was injured as she was being taken out. If the blood is in the bedroom, the injury happened before she was ever moved from where she slept. Each scenario points to a different sequence of events, and none of those scenarios have been confirmed. What has also not been confirmed publicly, despite 2 independent sources now reporting it, is that there was blood inside the house at all. The sheriff's department has not acknowledged this detail. No official statement has addressed it. The blood outside was confirmed. The blood inside remains, officially, unspoken. And that silence, that gap between what sources are telling reporters and what officials are saying publicly, is one of the defining features of this investigation at day 24. Because it is not limited to the blood inside the house. On the same day that the blood pattern confirmation was coming through from a law enforcement source, NBC News was releasing a taped interview with Sheriff Chris Nanos. The sheriff had recorded the interview the previous day. In it, he made 2 statements that reporters immediately identified as problematic. The first, there are no names that the sheriff's team is looking into. The second, there is a snag with the mixed DNA at the Florida lab that the sheriff is using. Michael Ruiz of Fox News Digital addressed the first statement directly. He said it runs completely counter to what reporters and independent investigators have been able to discover on the ground. Because what reporters have discovered on the ground is this: names and photographs have been taken to gun shops across Tucson. Multiple gun shop owners and workers have gone on television to confirm it. They were given lists. They ran those names through their systems. According to reporting from Brian Anton, the FBI was looking into upwards of 40 names. Other reporters confirmed several dozen photographs distributed across local gun shops. Not one of those gun shops came back with a positive result, which means, in the strictest technical sense, there are no names currently generating active leads. And perhaps that is what the sheriff meant, not that there are no names being investigated, but that none of the names investigated have panned out. That distinction matters, because saying no names when you mean no names that have gone anywhere yet is not the same thing. And in an investigation that depends on public tips and public trust, the difference between those 2 statements is not semantic. It is consequential. The second statement, the snag with the mixed DNA, presented a different kind of contradiction. Because on the very next day, the sheriff's office released a written statement that said, and these are the exact words, "All evidence from the crime scene and search warrant scenes has been submitted for analysis. Lab experts are working through that analysis. As with any biological evidence, there can be challenges separating DNA. There are currently no updates regarding this process. No updates." On the same day, the sheriff had told NBC on camera that the lab is struggling with the mixture. Those two communications, one on camera, one in writing, describe the same situation in fundamentally incompatible ways. One is an update. The other says, there is no update. The public received the written version. NBC received the truth. And behind all of this, behind the contradictions, the gun shop visits, the 40 names, the blood inside the house that no official will confirm, there is a piece of biological evidence in a laboratory in Deerfield Beach, Florida, that may eventually answer every question, or may answer none of them. The gloves found approximately 2 miles from Nancy's home came back from the National DNA Database relatively quickly. No hits, no match. And, specifically, no match to the biological material found inside the home. That comparison matters. The database those gloves were run against CODIS contains over 19 million offender profiles nationally, including over 434,000 from Arizona alone. Every person in that database who has been arrested or convicted of a qualifying serious offense has had their DNA compelled into that system. The person whose DNA was on those gloves is not in it. Either they have never committed a crime serious enough to qualify, which is statistically significant, given what they are suspected of here, or those gloves simply were not theirs. But the gloves are the easy part of this story. The material found inside Nancy's home is something else entirely. It is a mixture. And that single word mixture is the reason a laboratory in Florida is struggling, the reason the sheriff gave conflicting accounts to 2 different outlets on 2 consecutive days, and the reason the most important piece of forensic evidence in this case may or may not ever yield a name. I needed someone who could explain exactly what that means, not in technical language, in plain terms. What does a struggling laboratory look like from the inside? What does a mixture actually tell investigators? And is there a point at which the science simply cannot provide an answer? I spoke with the one person best positioned to answer all of those questions, C.C. Moore, Chief Genetic Genealogist at Parabon Nanolabs, the leading private forensic genealogy organization in the country, and someone who has spent her career solving cases that standard DNA analysis could not crack. The first thing C.C. Moore addressed was the most fundamental question: what does it mean that the lab is struggling? And her answer reframed everything about the home sample that we thought we understood. If the mixture inside Nancy's home contained Nancy's own DNA, combined with one unknown male contributor, the lab would not be struggling. That sounds counterintuitive, but it makes complete sense once you understand the process. Investigators have Nancy's DNA. They have her blood from the front porch. It has been confirmed as hers, which means they have what scientists call a reference sample, a known, clean, confirmed genetic profile that belongs to one of the people in the mixture. If Nancy's DNA is in the home sample, they can mathematically subtract her known profile from the mixture and examine what remains. That process, separating individual genetic contributions from a combined sample, has a name. It is called deconvolution, and laboratories like Parabon do it regularly. The fact that DNA Labs International is struggling means, in C.C. Moore's assessment, that Nancy's DNA is probably not one of the contributors in that mixture. Think about what that means. The biological material inside Nancy's home most likely does not include her own DNA as a component, which means the mixture comes from people the laboratory has no reference sample for, people who are unknown, and potentially more than 2 of them. Imagine taking several different colors of paint and pouring them into the same bucket. Now imagine being asked to separate those colors back out into their original pure forms without being told how many colors were in the bucket, what any of them looked like individually, or how much of each was used. That is deconvolution on an unknown mixture. And the more colors in the bucket, the harder it becomes. If there are 3 contributors in the home sample, or 4, and investigators have no reference samples for any of them, the challenge is not just difficult. At certain proportions, it becomes statistically impossible. That threshold, the point at which identification becomes impossible, comes down to a single number, 10%. If the person investigators are trying to identify contributes only 10% or less of the total mixture, extraction of a viable individual profile may be virtually impossible. Not because the laboratory is inadequate. DNA Labs International, in Deerfield Beach, Florida, is one of the most capable private forensic laboratories in the country. They have solved remarkably difficult cases. Their track record is real. The limitation is not the laboratory's ability, it is the mathematics of mixture deconvolution at extreme proportions, 10%. That is the number sitting at the center of this investigation right now. But let us step back from the bad news, because C.C. Moore was careful to say that this is not necessarily a dead end. It depends on factors the public does not have access to. How many people are in the mixture? What the proportions are? Whether any of the contributors can be identified through another route, and their DNA then used as a reference sample to extract the others. Every one of those variables changes the outcome, and there are still pathways forward. The first pathway is the one most people are familiar with: CODIS, the National Combined DNA Index System. This uses what scientists call an STR profile, short tandem, repeat a specific type of genetic marker that has been used in forensic identification for decades. When the gloves came back from CODIS with no hits, that was a CODIS search. If the laboratory can successfully deconvolute the home mixture and extract a clean individual profile, that profile can also be run against CODIS. An exact match or a near match, indicating a close family relative, would give investigators a name almost immediately, but CODIS requires an exact or near-exact match. It searches only within a specific database of people who have previously been required to submit their DNA. If the suspect has no qualifying criminal history, CODIS will not find them, regardless of how perfect the extracted profile is. That is where the second pathway becomes critical, and this one is different in almost every way. The second pathway is called investigative genetic genealogy. It uses a completely different type of genetic marker, a SNP, or single nucleotide polymorphism. Where STRs look at relatively few locations in the genome, SNP analysis examines approximately 700,000 genetic markers across the entire genome. The reason that matters is that it creates the power to find distant relatives, not just parents and siblings, but second cousins, third cousins, fourth cousins, people who share a common ancestor with the suspect 2 or 3 or 4 generations back. If even one distant relative of the suspect has voluntarily uploaded their DNA to an accessible database, forensic genealogists like C.C. Moore can potentially find them, build out a family tree, and work their way down to a living suspect. The critical word there is accessible, because here is where this investigation runs into a wall that sits at the center of American forensic science right now. Over 50 million people in the United States have taken a direct-to-consumer DNA test. Ancestry, 2, 3, and Me. These are household names. Their databases are enormous. And law enforcement cannot touch them. These are private companies whose customers did not consent to law enforcement access when they purchased the product. The companies have made a deliberate choice, and not without legitimate reasoning, to protect their customers' data from government access. They do not share profiles. They do not accept forensic samples, and they have the resources to defend that position in court. C.C. Moore has spent years trying to correct a widespread misconception about this. The vast majority of people believe law enforcement is already using Ancestry and 2, 3, and Me to solve crimes. They are not. Not a single forensic DNA sample has ever successfully made it into either of those databases, either through a warrant or through any other mechanism. When people say they tested at Ancestry to help solve cases, they are not helping. Law enforcement cannot see those profiles. The dam is completely closed. What law enforcement can access are 3 smaller, opt-in databases. GEDmatch, where users voluntarily check a box indicating they are willing to have their profile compared against law enforcement samples from violent criminal cases. Family Tree DNA, a second accessible database. And DNA Justice, a newer non-profit platform specifically designed for investigative genetic genealogy, where profiles are visible only to law enforcement and credentialed genealogists, not to the general public. Someone who wants to help solve cases like Nancy Guthrie's, but does not want their matches visible to other users, can upload to DNA Justice and contribute without any privacy exposure. The challenge is the process. To get into any of these databases, a person has to have already tested somewhere Ancestry, 2, 3, and Me, another service, download their raw data file, create a new account at one of the accessible platforms, and manually upload. That is, multiple steps, multiple barriers. And according to C.C. Moore, researchers lose a significant proportion of willing participants somewhere in that process. People who genuinely want to help cannot navigate the technical steps required to actually do it. If you are watching this and you have tested at Ancestry or 23andMe and you want to help find Nancy Guthrie, the path is this. Download your raw DNA data from whichever company you tested with. Go to GEDmatch or Family Tree DNA or DNA Justice. Create an account. Upload your raw data. Opt in to law enforcement matching. That single action could be the link that connects investigators to the suspect through a cousin they did not know they shared. Now, here is the question that everyone who has been following this case has been asking. If Ancestry and 23andMe are off limits, could the FBI serve a warrant and force access? C.C. Moore's answer was direct. She believes a warrant is coming. Not as speculation, as assessment, from someone embedded in this field who understands both the legal landscape and the institutional readiness of the FBI. She described the legal argument clearly. It is very difficult to legally keep law enforcement out of somewhere that the general public is able to freely access. That precedent articulated by former FBI lawyer Steve Kramer is the foundation of the argument that the FBI has reportedly already prepared. The arguments are laid out. The legal framework is built. The question is, which case triggers it? C.C. Moore believes this case could be that case. If the laboratory in Florida cannot produce a viable SNP profile from the home mixture, or if they produce one and the accessible databases return nothing, the pressure to serve those warrants on Ancestry and 23andMe will become enormous. And once a warrant is successfully served and survives legal challenge, the dam breaks. Every law enforcement agency in the country that has been quietly waiting for someone else to go first will follow. The forensic genealogy landscape in the United States will change permanently. There is one more detail from the forensic picture that C.C. Moore specifically highlighted, and it is the most hopeful element of this entire evidence discussion. Look at the footage from the doorbell camera. Look at the suspect's face. He has something in his mouth. It appears to be a bite flashlight, a compact torch designed to be held between the teeth, freeing both hands for work. He is wearing gloves. He has covered himself in a balaclava. Every visible surface of skin is either covered or obscured. He came to that house determined not to leave biological material, but he had a flashlight in his mouth, covered in saliva. At some point, he took it out, with his gloved hands, which means saliva transferred from the flashlight to his gloves. And then, as he moved through that house, as he touched surfaces and handled things, and possibly reached forward to disable the camera, that saliva was transferred from his gloves to whatever he touched. C.C. Moore was explicit. If he leaned forward toward that camera with that flashlight in his mouth, it would have been extremely difficult for him not to leave biological material on the ground, on the bracket, on the surrounding surface. That material, if it exists, and if it was collected, could be a single source sample, not a mixture, just his DNA. And a single source sample from an unknown suspect is a fundamentally different problem from a complex multi-contributor mixture. It is still hard, but it is not the same level of hard. C.C. Moore noted that if the laboratory had already found single-source saliva DNA from the bite flashlight area, she does not believe they would be describing the situation as a struggle. The fact that they are struggling suggests what they are working with is the mixture, and the bite flashlight, saliva, if it was collected, may be on a separate track entirely. There is one more thing C.C. Moore said that this community needs to hear. She appeared on national television separately from the conversations we have discussed tonight, and she spoke directly not to investigators, not to the public, but to the person who took Nancy Guthrie. She said, "If I was the kidnapper, I would be extremely concerned right now, because using investigative genetic genealogy, he will be identified. It is just a matter of time." That is not a television line. That is a professional assessment from the person who has arguably done more investigative genetic genealogy casework than anyone in the country. She is extremely hopeful, and she is telling whoever did this that the science is coming for them. While scientists in a laboratory in Florida work to untangle the most complex piece of evidence in this case, Nancy Guthrie's family was doing something entirely different. They were speaking directly to whoever took their mother, not through attorneys, not through intermediaries, through a camera, on the internet. to the entire world. Savannah Guthrie is one of the most practiced communicators in America. She has anchored breaking news. She has interviewed presidents. She has sat at that desk for years and delivered information to millions of people with composure and authority. In the videos she released after her mother's disappearance, she looked like a daughter, not an anchor, not a journalist, a daughter who did not know if her mother was alive. On February 4th, day 4, Savannah appeared alongside her brother Cameron and her sister Annie. Savannah's husband, Michael Feldman, had flown to Tucson to be with the family. The message was direct. They wanted proof of life. They were willing to negotiate, and they were not going to stop. On February 7th, Savannah released a second video. The family had received a communication, and her response to it was 3 sentences that told whoever was watching everything they needed to know. "We received your message, and we understand. We will pay." On the same day, President Trump called Savannah directly and offered additional federal resources, an extraordinary intervention that reflected the national attention this case had attracted and underscored the level at which the FBI was already engaged. Now, the ransom notes. Because this is where the case becomes not just complex, but layered in a way that investigators are still working through. The first ransom letter arrived on February 2nd, received by a CBS affiliate in Tucson. The same letter, or a version of it, was also sent to local television stations KOLD and KGUN. The letter contained something that investigators found significant specific details about what Nancy Guthrie was wearing on the night she disappeared, details that were not public. The inclusion of those details was used to assess whether the communication was from someone with actual knowledge of the crime or someone fabricating. A reported demand of $6 million was attached to a deadline of 5 p.m. on February 9th. $6 million, not 5, not 10. The specificity of that figure is something investigators analyze. Round numbers suggest inexperience. Precise figures sometimes suggest someone who has done calculations, who has thought about what they need and what they believe the target family can access. On February 7th, KOLD received a second note, claiming to be from the same sender. This one contained no deadline. A fourth communication arrived at TMZ, an email from a person claiming to know who took Nancy and where she was, stating that they had seen Nancy south of the border 5 days earlier and had been told to stay quiet. That communication has not been confirmed as credible, but it has not been publicly dismissed either. Both deadlines came and went on February 9th. No proof of life was received. And here is the layer that makes this even more complex. Not every ransom communication in this case came from the person who took Nancy Guthrie. On February 5th, just 4 days after the abduction, a 42-year-old man from California named Derek Kalela was arrested on federal charges for posing as the abductor and sending false ransom demands to the Guthrie family. He had nothing to do with the actual crime. He was exploiting the chaos and the family's desperation for his own purposes. Kayela's arrest illustrates something critical about high-profile missing persons cases that is easy to underestimate. Investigators are not just running a kidnapping investigation. They are simultaneously filtering through thousands of tips, multiple ransom communications, and the deliberate interference of people like Derek Kalela, all while trying to determine which communications, if any, are genuine. AI experts were brought in to analyze the ransom notes for linguistic patterns and authenticity markers. What those experts concluded has not been made public. What has been made public is that all members of the Guthrie family, Savannah, Annie, Cameron, and Tommaso Cioni, were formally cleared as suspects by the Sheriff's Department on February 16th. They were never credible suspects. But in an investigation of this nature, eliminating the people closest to the victim is a necessary and documented step. As the family waited and the laboratory worked, the field investigation was moving, and it was moving fast. On February 10th day, 10 FBI Director Kash Patel made a decision that signaled how seriously the federal government was treating this case. He personally released the doorbell camera footage to the public, describing the suspect as armed and dangerous. That is not a routine investigative step. FBI directors do not typically appear in missing persons cases at the 10-day mark. The involvement at that level reflected both the profile of the victim's family and the nature of the crime itself. The same evening, at 7:30 p.m., a man named Carlos Palazuelos was detained at a traffic stop in Rio Rico, Arizona. Rio Rico sits approximately 60 miles south of Tucson, near the United States-Mexico border. Law enforcement had used electronic investigative tools, phone usage data, and traffic data to identify Palazuelos before making the stop. A search warrant was executed on a property and a vehicle. Palazuelos was held overnight and released the next morning without charges. He was confirmed to have no connection to the case. The proximity to the border matters here because one of the unverified communications received in this case, the TMZ email, claimed the sender had seen Nancy south of the border. Whether investigators were acting on that tip when they detained Palazuelos, or whether his identification came entirely from the electronic data trail, has not been publicly confirmed. What is confirmed is that they looked south, 60 miles south. On February 12th, the FBI released its full description of the suspect. Height approximately 5 feet 9 to 5 feet 10 inches. Average build, black mustache, and what appears to be a goatee. A black 2.5-liter Ozark Trail hiker pack sold exclusively at Walmart, not at any other major retailer. Investigators are working directly with Walmart to trace the purchase of that specific backpack. If the suspect used any form of loyalty card, credit card, or was captured on in-store surveillance at the time of purchase, that trail exists. Somewhere in Walmart's records, there is a transaction. The question is whether it leads to a name. The suspect's gun was carried in a holster, but in an unusual position. Instead of the hip or the shoulder, which are the standard carry positions for anyone with even basic firearm training, the holster was positioned over the crotch area. Firearms expert John Correa analyzed the holster and identified it as a universal fit holster, not the type an experienced gun owner would typically use. That assessment narrows the profile. Someone who carries a firearm regularly develops preferences, specific holsters designed for specific weapons, worn in positions that balance access with comfort. A universal fit holster in an unusual position suggests someone who is not a regular or trained firearm carrier. That changes the demographic you are looking for. On February 13th, day 13, came the most dramatic investigative operation of the entire case so far. A residence located approximately 2 miles from Nancy Guthrie's home became the focus of a law enforcement operation. Roads were closed for approximately 4 hours. A 7-year-old convicted felon named Luke Daly was detained along with his 7-year-old mother. Daly's attorney, Chris Silepi, publicly confirmed the detention and his client's subsequent release without charges. Retired FBI Supervisory Special Agent Jason Pack described the February 13th operation as having the hallmarks of agents acting on specific, actionable intelligence, not a general search, not a routine canvass. Specific intelligence that pointed them to a specific address 2 miles from where Nancy slept. Daly was cleared. The residence was cleared. But 2 miles from Nancy Guthrie's front door is not a random search radius. During the same operation, a grey Range Rover was towed from the parking lot of a nearby Culver's restaurant. Law enforcement has never publicly confirmed whether that vehicle is connected to the investigation or was simply in the vicinity of an active search operation. That question remains open. Now, there is a theory that has circulated about this case and that investigators have not fully dismissed, even as they have publicly disputed it. The theory is that the abduction of Nancy Guthrie was a botched robbery, that the suspect came to her home intending to steal, that the kidnapping was not the plan, it was what happened when the plan went wrong. Pima County officials disputed this theory publicly, but the significance of the theory goes beyond whether it is true. If it is true even partially, everything about the suspect's profile changes. A person who planned a kidnapping and a person who panicked during a burglary are two fundamentally different individuals with two fundamentally different behavioral patterns in the days and weeks after the crime. A planned kidnapper has thought through contingencies. A panicked burglar is reacting in real time. The way they handle the aftermath, the way they behave, the way they move, the decisions they make would look completely different to someone who knows them. And that difference could be exactly the kind of behavioral anomaly that produces a credible tip. The reward for information leading to Nancy Guthrie's safe return currently stands at over $200,000, $100,000 from the FBI, $102,500 from Tucson Crime Stoppers 88 Crime, boosted by an anonymous donation of $100,000. Over 40,000 tips have been received by the FBI and the Sheriff's Office. Fabian Pacheco, the Chief of Detectives for the Pima County Attorney's Office, has confirmed publicly that approximately 10% of those tips have genuine investigative value. 10% of 40,000 is 4,000 leads, active leads. That is not a cold case. That is an investigation with more active threads than most investigations ever develop. While all of that was happening in the field, a separate problem was developing inside the investigation itself. And it is a problem that, depending on how seriously you take it, either explains the communication failures we have discussed tonight or makes them worse. The New York Post published a report citing sources who say they are inside the investigation. The report describes a management structure that insiders are calling highly unusual and potentially damaging to the quality of the investigative work being done. According to the reporting, Sheriff Chris Nanos has restricted all final decision-making authority in this investigation to 3 people: himself, Chief Jesus Lopez, and Captain Juan Carlos Navarro. 3 men. In an investigation with several hundred law enforcement personnel, an investigation that involves the FBI, Quantico analysts, crisis negotiators, a cellular analysis survey team, and the forensic resources of multiple agencies. An insider quoted by the Post was direct. He will only let himself or 2 of his hand-picked staffers make decisions on the case. Everybody else is being told what to do. No one else has a say or an opinion. It is just 3 men making decisions. It is incredibly unusual to do that when you have so many people working together and the FBI is involved. A second element of the reporting is arguably more troubling. The same source described the FBI as being kept out of key information. They just are not sharing, the source said. In an investigation where the FBI has resources database access, analytical capabilities, forensic genealogy teams that the Pima County Sheriff's Department does not have independently, that wall between local command and federal investigators is not just a management problem, it is an investigative one. The phrase used by the insider to describe the structure has stuck, the tail wagging the dog. In a standard major investigation, experienced detectives steer the case. They have the forensic knowledge, the witness relationships, the pattern recognition built from years of working homicides and kidnappings. Command staff support that work and manage its public and logistical dimensions. When the structure is reversed, when command is driving, and detectives are following the people with the most relevant expertise, have the least authority. That is, the tail wagging the dog. To be fair, and the insider quoted by the Post was fair, tight information control is not in itself unusual in a high-profile active investigation. The Koberger case in Idaho, one of the most closely watched criminal cases of recent years, was characterized by the same kind of strict information lockdown before the arrest was made. In that context, the sheriff's caution about what gets shared and with whom is not inherently suspicious. The question the Post's reporting raises is more specific. Is the structure limiting not just the flow of information outward, but the quality of the investigative thinking being applied inward? 3 men, however capable, have the thought process of 3 men. A room full of experienced detectives has something else. Sheriff Nanos spoke to the New York Times about this criticism and about the case itself. He said, "Maybe it is an hour from now, maybe it is weeks or months or years from now, but we will not quit. We are going to find Nancy. We are going to find this guy." On the same day this reporting was circulating, the sheriff's office released a written statement. It is worth going through what it actually says and what it does not say, because the gap between those 2 things is where the public frustration with this investigation lives. The statement opens with neighborhood activity. Detectives and FBI agents are back in the Guthrie neighborhood, canvassing as part of the investigation. No additional details will be provided. The roads around Nancy's street, which at one point saw upwards of 300 media vehicles descend simultaneously, have been restructured. One way only, 0 parking on one side. Barricades placed. No parking signs posted. Fox Digital captured crews doing the work. This is standard crowd management. It does not signal progress or retreat in the investigation. It signals that 300 media vehicles on a residential street became logistically untenable for the people who still live there. The statement then addresses gloves. Detectives and agents have collected multiple gloves from the area, and analysis is part of the investigation. Specific details will not be shared. Multiple gloves, not just the pair found 2 miles from the home that came back from Codis with no hits. Additional gloves recovered from the surrounding search area. Whether any of those additional gloves have produced a result that the single-word analysis is quietly covering, we do not know. Resources. There have been no changes. Several hundred law enforcement personnel remain dedicated. There may be fluctuations day to day. The investigation will continue until Nancy is found or all leads are exhausted. This language is standard. It is also designed to be heard as reassurance without committing to anything specific. Then DNA. And here is where the statement becomes the problem. The exact words. All evidence from the crime scene and search warrant scenes has been submitted for analysis. Lab experts are working through that analysis. As with any biological evidence, there can be challenges separating DNA. There are currently no updates regarding this process. No updates. On the same day that the sheriff had told NBC on camera that the lab in Florida is struggling with a mixed sample, he gave NBC an update. He gave the public a statement saying there is no update. Those two things cannot both be true, and the people who follow this case closely know it. The frustration is not unfair. When the sheriff releases a written statement that says no updates, and then an interview drops where he describes a specific and significant challenge in the forensic process, trust erodes. And in an investigation that depends on public cooperation and public tips, trust is not a soft consideration. It is a resource. The statement also addresses the private helicopter that was observed searching in what appeared to be a grid pattern over a landfill in the Tucson area. The sheriff's position, the private aerial activity near a landfill, was not related to this investigation. What that statement confirms is that the official investigative team was not operating that helicopter. What it does not confirm is whether the helicopter was carrying any kind of signal detection equipment, a device that can locate the Bluetooth signal from a pacemaker, sometimes called a signal sniffer, can be operated by private individuals or groups acting independently of law enforcement. If that helicopter was equipped with that technology and was looking for a pacemaker signal, the activity was directly relevant to this case, regardless of whether sheriff's investigators were aboard. That question has not been addressed. The statement discouraged volunteer search parties. The sheriff asked volunteer groups to give investigators the space they need to do their work. He directed anyone wanting to help to official Pima County volunteer channels. He cited private property laws. He said this work is best left to professionals. The criticism of that position is simple, and it was made clearly by experienced observers of missing persons cases. The Sonoran Desert surrounding Tucson covers thousands of square miles. Several hundred professional investigators cannot cover that ground alone. In the Elizabeth Smart case, which resulted in a safe recovery, private search parties operated on an enormous scale and contributed meaningfully. The concern about contaminating evidence or disrupting investigative operations is legitimate, but so is the concern that the desert is a very large place and they need every pair of eyes available. The statement closes with a line that generated more reaction than perhaps any other. Media availability. There are currently no press briefings scheduled. We do not anticipate any sheriff media availability next week. No briefings, no availability. In an active, nationally watched case involving a missing 84-year-old woman, an unknown suspect, a forensic DNA challenge, and a reward of over $200,000, the only updates will come via the official Pima County Sheriff social media account, and the only on-camera interview the sheriff has given recently contradicted the written statement he released the following morning. That is not clarity. That is, as it was described by someone covering this case closely, clear as mud. So, where does this case actually stand? Tonight, on day 24. Nancy Guthrie's whereabouts remain unknown. No suspect has been publicly identified. The investigation is active, and according to law enforcement experts, it will remain distinguishable from a cold case for as long as there are active leads being worked. Given that there are still thousands of tips being evaluated and multiple forensic tracks in progress simultaneously, that threshold has not been reached. But the investigation is transitioning. Several hundred investigators working around the clock is a posture that cannot be maintained indefinitely. The expectation confirmed by sources familiar with the case is that the investigation will soon move into a new phase. Fewer dedicated personnel. A smaller, specialized long-term task force focused exclusively on the remaining active threads. The Guthrie family has been quietly briefed that certain leads have not been panning out. That is not a defeat. That is the natural progression of any investigation that has moved through its emergency phase and into its long game phase. But it is real, and it has not been said publicly until now. The clothing trace is ongoing. Investigators have identified the shoes, the pants, and the jacket worn by the suspect in the footage. At least one of those items is actively being traced through its manufacturer and its retailer. Sheriff Nanos confirmed publicly that investigators are getting closer to identifying some of the clothing. Closer is not there, but it is movement. The FBI's Cellular Analysis Survey team is processing the phone data from the area around the time of the abduction. This is a process that maps every device that was active within a geographic area during a specific time window, every phone that pinged a tower, every device that transmitted a signal. Jason Pack has said publicly that they have data mountains of it. Names have surfaced and been evaluated. Some have been cleared. Others may still be in play. That process is ongoing. Google is attempting to recover additional back-end data from Nancy's Nest camera system. The live recordings are gone overwritten, but metadata, partial image data, and server-side records may still be extractable. That effort is ongoing, and the laboratory in Deerfield Beach, Florida, is still working. The mixture is still being analyzed. The deconvolution is still being attempted. And if a viable SNP profile emerges from that work, the entire genealogy database landscape of this country may be about to change. One thing that has not been resolved and that has received less attention than it deserves is the absence of a confirmed vehicle. Despite extensive surveillance review across the Catalina foothills area, across the surrounding roads, across every available camera feed in the search radius, investigators have been unable to associate a specific vehicle with this abduction. No car, no direction of travel, no confirmed route. For a crime that occurred at 2 in the morning in a residential neighborhood with limited access points, that absence is one of the most significant gaps in the entire case. Before we close tonight, I want to speak directly to anyone watching this in the Tucson area, or anyone who knows someone in the Tucson area. Whoever took Nancy Guthrie on the night of February 1st did not walk back into a normal life the next morning. That is not how this works. The decisions that had to be made after that night, where to go, what to do, how to handle what came next, those are not decisions that leave a person unchanged. Habits change. Patterns change. Behavior changes. Someone who was reliable becomes unreliable. Someone who was present becomes absent. Someone who was calm becomes jumpy. If you know someone in the Tucson area who started acting differently on or after February 1st disappeared for unexplained stretches of time, changed their routine with no clear reason, became nervous or withdrawn in ways that felt out of character, that is a tip. That is exactly the kind of observation investigators need. Here is what you know about the suspect. Average build. Approximately 5 feet 9 to 5 feet 10 inches tall. A black mustache and what appears to be a goatee. He carried a black 2.5-liter Ozark Trail hiker pack, sold exclusively at Walmart. He carried a firearm in a universal fit holster, worn in an unusual position. He wore a balaclava and gloves. He had what appeared to be a bite flashlight in his mouth. He visited Nancy's home at least twice, once without any equipment, once with everything. He covered a camera with a plant leaf when his first method of disabling it failed. He walked away from that home without leaving a confirmed vehicle in any surveillance footage investigators have reviewed. He may have been wearing a ring. The Ozark Trail backpack is a Walmart exclusive. It is not carried at other major retailers. It was purchased at Walmart, and Walmart keeps records. If the suspect used any loyalty program, any payment method that links to an identity, or was captured on in-store surveillance at the time of purchase, that trail exists. If you work at a Walmart in the Tucson area and remember someone purchasing that specific backpack in the weeks before February 1st, that memory is a tip. Do not call the tip line with theories. Do not call with general thoughts or complaints. Call with what you saw. Call with what you know. Call with the specific, concrete observation that you have been sitting on because you are not sure if it was worth reporting. It is worth reporting. The FBI tip line is 1-800-CALL-FBI. That is 1-800-225-5324. The Pima County Sheriff's Department direct line is 520-351-4900. Tucson Crime Stoppers takes anonymous tips at 88 Crime. The reward is over $200,000. And somewhere in the Tucson area, someone knows something. This case does not get solved by the laboratory alone. It gets solved by a person making a phone call. Day 24. The blood pattern confirmed inside and outside the home, in a pattern that speaks to movement without struggle and still unacknowledged by any official. The mixed DNA sample still being worked in a laboratory in Florida, its contributors unknown, its proportions uncertain, its eventual outcome still in question. The clothing being traced, the cellular data being processed, the genealogy databases waiting either for a viable profile to upload or for the warrant that changes the rules of the game entirely. And Nancy Guthrie still missing. This is not a closed case. This is not a cold case. This is a case in motion with active forensic work, active field investigation, and the full attention of both the FBI and the Pima County Sheriff's Department, whatever the tensions between those two entities may be. The next development in this case, whether it comes from the laboratory, the clothing trace, the cellular data, the genealogy databases, or a phone call from someone in the Tucson area who has been sitting on something they were not sure was important, could come any day. If you are not subscribed yet, subscribe right now. Turn on notifications. When this case breaks, and it will break, you want to be here for it, not catching up. Here, drop a comment and tell me where you are watching from tonight. And tell me what you think the breakthrough is going to be. The DNA, the clothing, the cellular data, a tip from someone who knows the suspect? I read every comment. I want to know what you think. Share this video. Every share puts the suspect's description, Nancy's story, and these tip lines in front of someone new, someone who might have the one piece of information this investigation is still missing. Nancy Guthrie is 84 years old. She led Bible study and played mahjong and built programs for sick people in hospitals because that is who she is. She encouraged her daughter to become a journalist. She worked 17 years at a university so her children could go to school for free. She is somewhere, and she deserves to be found. Truth is not just serious, it is drop-dead serious. We will see you at the next update.